The wheel caught another rut, and Ruthie Elkins gripped the wooden bench harder as the stagecoach lurched sideways. Her fingers, already numb from the Montana cold, could barely feel the splintered wood beneath them. Through the frost-covered window, she watched the endless stretch of pine trees blur past their branches, heavy with December snow. "That's as far as you go, miss." The driver's gruff voice cut through the wind as the coach rolled to an unexpected stop. Ruthie looked up confused. They were nowhere near Cold Pines, just a narrow spot where the mountain road widened enough for the horses to turn around. "I beg your pardon." She tried to keep her voice steady, though her heart had begun racing. "My ticket is to Cold Pines. That's another 15 miles. The driver climbed down from his perch, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. He was a thick-set man with a gray beard stained yellow from tobacco. Behind him, the other passengers, 2 merchants and a traveling preacher, avoided her gaze. "Your ticket don't mean nothing if you can't pay the full fare," he said, yanking open the coach door. Cold air rushed in like an unwelcome visitor. "You're $3 short." But I explained about the robbery in Billings. Those men took everything. "Not my problem," he gestured impatiently. "Out!" Ruthie's hands trembled as she gathered her worn canvas bag. It held everything she owned: a spare dress, her mother's Bible, a handful of sewing needles, and some thread. The weight of the silver bracelet on her wrist, her mother's final gift, seemed heavier than usual. "Please," she said quietly, standing but not yet stepping down. "It's nearly dark. The temperature—" "Should have thought of that before you got on without proper fare." The driver's eyes were hard as flint. "I got schedules to keep." One of the merchants finally spoke up, his voice thin and nervous. "Now, Jenkins, surely we can—" "You wanting to pay her way, Mr. Hartley?" The driver spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Didn't think so." Ruthie lifted her chin, summoning what remained of her pride. She'd been raised better than to beg. Her father may have lost everything before he died, but he taught her that dignity couldn't be taken, only surrendered. She stepped down into the snow, her worn boots immediately soaking through. The hem of her traveling dress, already frayed from weeks of wear, dragged in the white powder. She'd mended it twice already, but there was only so much thread could do. "Ma'am," the preacher called out weakly, "I'll pray for you." She almost laughed at that. Prayers hadn't kept her father's store from failing. Prayers hadn't stopped Thomas Garrett from breaking their engagement the moment her dowry vanished. Prayers hadn't prevented those men from robbing the passengers outside Billings, taking her last $20 along with everyone else's valuables. The coach door slammed shut. Jenkins climbed back up to his seat without another glance. The horses snorted their breath, forming clouds in the frigid air. And then they were moving, leaving her standing alone on the mountain road. Ruthie watched until the coach disappeared around a bend, taking with it the last connection to civilization. The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine boughs and the distant crack of branches under the weight of snow. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, though it did little against the cold. 27 years old, and here she stood abandoned in the Montana wilderness, with the night falling and nowhere to go but forward. The letter in her bag had mentioned Cold Pines, a logging settlement where her mother's cousin supposedly lived. She'd never met the woman, but desperation had a way of making even the thinnest connections seem like lifelines. Now, 15 miles of mountain road stretched between her and that hope. Ruthie took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and began walking. Her boots slipped on the packed snow where the coach wheels had compressed it. On either side, the forest pressed close, dark and watchful. She'd grown up in St. Louis, where the wildest thing she'd encountered was a stray dog in the alley behind her father's shop. After an hour, full darkness had fallen. The moon, when it showed through the clouds, turned the snow-covered road into a ribbon of pale blue. Her feet had gone numb, which was almost a mercy she could no longer feel where her boots had rubbed blisters during the long coach ride. She thought of her father's shop, the smell of new fabric, and the satisfying snap of scissors through cloth. She'd been good with a needle, better than good. Ladies had come from across the city for her delicate embroidery. But that was before the financial panic, before her father's heart gave out, before Thomas looked at her like she was suddenly a stranger. "A man has to think of his future," Thomas had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You understand." She'd understood perfectly. She understood that 3 years of courtship meant nothing without money behind it. She understood that promises were only as solid as the bank account that backed them. A branch cracked somewhere in the forest, and Ruthie froze. Stories from the coach ride came back to her: wolves, bears, mountain cats. She had nothing to defend herself with except her sewing scissors, and those were buried deep in her bag. "Keep walking." The thought was her mother's voice, practical and steady. Margaret Elkins had survived worse than this: war, poverty, the loss of 2 children before Ruthie was born. She'd pressed the silver bracelet into Ruthie's hands 3 days before consumption finally claimed her. "This came from your grandmother," she'd whispered, her voice paper thin. "She brought it from Ireland. It's seen hard times before. It'll see you through yours." Ruthie touched the bracelet now through her glove, drawing strength from its presence. The silver was worn smooth from years of wear, etched with a pattern of leaves that had softened but never quite disappeared. The road began to climb more steeply. Her breathing came in sharp gasps that left clouds of vapor in the air. How many miles had she covered? 3, 4. It felt like 100. Her legs shook with each step, and she had to stop frequently to rest against the snow-covered trees. During one of these stops, she heard the faint sound of bells. Not church bells, but the smaller, tinkling kind that might hang from a horse's harness. Hope flared in her chest. Perhaps another traveler, someone who might help. But the sound faded without coming closer, carried away on the wind. A ghost of civilization taunting her. She pushed on. What else could she do? Behind her lay nothing but the empty road and the certainty of freezing. Ahead, at least, there was a chance. Cold pines. A cousin she'd never met. A new beginning, perhaps, if she could survive the night. Her dress caught on something, and she heard the fabric tear. One more thing, broken, one more thing that couldn't be fixed. She almost cried then, but tears would only freeze on her cheeks. The moon disappeared behind clouds, plunging the road into deeper darkness. Ruthie stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. Her thoughts began to scatter like snowflakes. She imagined warmth, her mother's kitchen bread rising by the stove, soup bubbling in the pot. When had she last eaten? This morning, yesterday, the days blurred together. There had been hard biscuits on the coach, but those cost extra, and she'd been saving every penny for when she reached Cold Pines. A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, the sound raising every hair on her neck. Another answered it closer. Ruthie forced her legs to move faster, though they felt like they belonged to someone else. The road seemed to sway beneath her feet. Perhaps the driver had been right to put her off. Perhaps she was foolish to think she could start over, that there was any place in this harsh country for a woman with nothing but a bag of sewing supplies and a silver bracelet. Perhaps she didn't see the ice until she was already falling. Her boot slipped, her ankle twisted, and suddenly she was face down in the snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, driving what little breath remained from her lungs. "Get up!" Her mother's voice again, firm and uncompromising. "Get up, Ruth Ann!" She tried. She managed to push herself to her knees, but the world spun sickeningly. Her ankle throbbed. When she tried to stand, it wouldn't bear her weight. So this was how it would end. Not in a warm bed surrounded by family, not even in the questionable comfort of a coach. Just here alone on a mountain road, another casualty of the unforgiving West. They'd find her come spring if the wolves left anything to find. She crawled to the side of the road, propping herself against a pine tree. At least she could face whatever came with her back straight. The Elkins women didn't die cowering. The clouds parted again and moonlight flooded the forest. It was beautiful, she had to admit. The snow sparkled like her mother's Sunday diamonds, the ones they'd sold first when times got hard. The trees stood like cathedral pillars, solemn and eternal. If she had to die, there were worse places. Ruthie closed her eyes, conserving what warmth remained. She thought she heard hoofbeats, but that was probably delirium setting in. Strange how the mind played tricks at the end. The hoofbeats grew louder, too real to be imagination. She forced her eyes open. A horse and rider emerged from the darkness like something out of a dream. The man was large, bundled in furs that made him seem even larger. He guided his mount with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. The horse stopped snorting steam into the night air. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the rider swung down his boots, hitting the snow with a solid thud that said this was real, not some cold-induced vision. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep roughened by winter air or perhaps tobacco. "You hurt?" She tried to answer, but her voice wouldn't come. She nodded instead, a small, defeated gesture. He moved closer, and she could see his face in the moonlight, weathered-bearded, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Not a young man, but not old either. The kind of face carved by hard winters and harder choices. "Can you stand?" She shook her head, gesturing weakly to her ankle. Without another word, he knelt in the snow beside her, his hands gentle as they checked her ankle through her boot. She should have been frightened, a strange man, a lonely road. But she was beyond fear now, beyond everything but the simple need for warmth. "Nothing broken," he said quietly. "But you can't walk on it. Where were you headed?" "Cold Pines." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Something shifted in his expression. "That's another 10 miles, in this weather at night." He didn't finish, but she heard what he didn't say. Impossible. He stood, decision made. "You're coming with me." The stranger's horse was a sturdy mountain breed, black as the spaces between stars. Steam rose from its flanks in the cold air as the man approached Ruthie again, his movements deliberate and calm. "Name's Wesley Calder," he said, pulling off one leather glove. "Folks call me Wes. I manage the logging operation at Cold Pines." She looked at his offered hand for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm but careful, as if he was aware of his strength and consciously moderating it. Ruth Elkins. Ruthie. "Well, Miss Elkins, we need to get you somewhere warm before that ankle swells more and the cold does worse." He studied her with eyes that seemed gray in the moonlight. "Can you ride?" Yes." Though in truth she hadn't been on a horse since she was 12 and never in skirts this cumbersome. Without ceremony, he lifted her to her feet. The world tilted dangerously, and she would have fallen if not for his steadying arm. He was solid as the pine trees around them, smelling of leather and wood smoke and something else, the clean scent of winter forest. "Easy now," he murmured, the same tone she'd heard her father use with skittish horses. "Let's get you up on Blackjack here." The process was awkward and painful. Her ankles screamed protest with every movement, and her frozen skirts made everything more difficult. But Wes was patient, lifting her with surprising gentleness onto the saddle. The warmth of the horse beneath her was almost overwhelming after so long in the cold. "You'll need to ride astride," he said matter-of-factly. "Side saddle won't work on these trails." Any other time she might have protested the impropriety, but propriety seemed a luxury she could no longer afford. She arranged her skirts as best she could while he collected her canvas bag from where it had fallen. He swung up behind her with practiced ease, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She stiffened at the contact. No man had been this close to her since Thomas, and even he had maintained proper distance during their courtship. "Relax," Wes said quietly. "You'll make Blackjack nervous, and you need the warmth." He was right. The heat radiating from his chest was already seeping through her thin shawl. She forced herself to lean back slightly, survival trumping society's rules. They rode in silence for a time, Blackjack picking his way carefully along the snowy road. Wes guided the horse with subtle movements, clearly familiar with every turn and hazard. The forest pressed close on either side, but somehow it seemed less threatening now. "You came from the stage," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "They put me off. I was $3 short after the robbery in Billings." She felt him tense slightly behind her. "Jenkins left you out here in this weather?" "He had schedules to keep," she said, echoing the driver's words with bitter irony. Wes muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. "Man's got ice where his heart should be. Always has." "You know him." "Everyone knows everyone in these parts. Doesn't mean we like each other." He guided Blackjack around a fallen branch. "What brings you to Cold Pines, if you don't mind my asking?" "My mother's cousin lives there, Martha Brewster. At least she did 5 years ago when she last wrote." Another pause. "Martha passed 2 winters back, pneumonia." The words hit her like a physical blow, her last hope gone before she even arrived. She closed her eyes, fighting back the wave of despair that threatened to pull her under. "I'm sorry," Wes said quietly. "She was a good woman." "I never met her," Ruthie admitted. "She was just a possibility. Somewhere to go." "And now?" She almost laughed. "Now I have nothing. No money, no family, no prospects. Just a bag of sewing supplies and my mother's bracelet." They rode in silence again. The moon disappeared behind clouds, plunging them into darkness, relieved only by Blackjack's sure footing. Ruthie shivered despite the warmth at her back. "Cold?" Wes asked. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." He shifted somehow, managing to wrap part of his heavy coat around her while still maintaining control of the horse. "Pride won't keep you warm, Miss Elkins." The extra warmth was immediate and overwhelming. She wanted to protest to maintain some distance, but her body betrayed her. She found herself sinking back against him, drawn to his warmth, like a moth to flame. "There's an old trapper's cabin about a mile ahead," he said. "We'll stop there for the night." "We can't. It wouldn't be proper." "What wouldn't be proper is letting you freeze to death for the sake of reputation." His voice held a hint of dry humor. "Besides, you can't survive outside tonight, and it's still 5 miles to my place at the camp. Your choice. Miss Elkins, propriety or survival?" Put that way, there was no choice at all. "Survival," she whispered. Sensible woman. The cabin appeared out of the darkness like something from a fairy tale, small, rough-hewn with a stone chimney and a covered porch nearly buried in snow. Wes dismounted first, then helped her down, catching her when her injured ankle buckled. "Lean on me," he instructed, wrapping one of her arms around his shoulders. "That's it." They made their way slowly to the door, which opened with a protesting creak. Inside the cabin was pitch black and cold, but at least they were out of the wind. "Stay here," Wes said, guiding her to what felt like a rough wooden chair. "I'll get a fire going." She heard him moving around in the darkness with the confidence of familiarity. Soon, the scratch of a match broke the silence and a small flame appeared. He lit a candle, then another, revealing a single room with basic furnishings, a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace. "Home sweet home," he said with dry irony, already working on kindling in the fireplace. "I use it sometimes when I'm checking the farther timber stands." Within minutes, he had a fire crackling. The warmth was almost painful as feeling returned to Ruthie's frozen extremities. She bit back a whimper as her fingers began to throb. Wes noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything. "Hurts, doesn't it? Coming back to life always does." He pulled off his coat, revealing a wool shirt and leather vest beneath. "Let's see about that ankle." He knelt in front of her, unlacing her boot with careful fingers. She should have protested a strange man handling her foot, but the relief when the boot came off overwhelmed propriety. Swollen, but not too bad, he assessed, gently manipulating her ankle. "Keep it elevated tonight, and you should be able to travel tomorrow." "Travel where?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He sat back on his heels, studying her in the firelight. "That's a question, isn't it?" He stood moving to tend the fire. "You could try for Willow Creek. It's bigger than Cold Pines, might have work for a seamstress." "How far?" 3 days by stage, if you had money for the stage." Which she didn't. They both knew it. "I can sew," she said quietly. "Mend things, embroidery too. Surely someone in Cold Pines needs—" "It's a logging camp, Miss Elkins. 30 men who barely remember to mend their clothes when they're falling off." He paused his back to her as he adjusted a log. "Course that might mean they need someone who does remember." Hope flickered. "Do you think—" "I think you need food and rest before making any decisions." He moved to his saddlebags, pulling out wrapped packages. "When did you last eat?" She tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, maybe—" He made that sound again, the one that might have been a curse. Soon he had produced hardtack dried meat and, surprisingly, a small pot of preserved peaches. "Peaches?" she asked, surprised. "Christmas gift from the camp cook. Been saving them." He handed her a portion on a tin plate. "Seems like a good enough occasion." The sweetness of the peaches nearly brought tears to her eyes. She ate slowly, savoring each bite while Wes made coffee in a battered pot. "Thank you," she said when she finished, "for all of this. I know you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." His voice was flat matter-of-fact. "Man who leaves someone to freeze isn't much of a man." They sat in companionable silence, sipping the bitter coffee. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. Outside, wind howled through the pines, but inside the circle of warmth, it couldn't touch them. "You'll sleep sounder once you're mine," Wes said suddenly. Ruthie's head snapped up, coffee sloshing dangerously. "I beg your pardon." His eyes met hers across the fire, steady and serious. "Not because I own you, but because you'll be safe." "I don't understand." He set down his cup, choosing his words carefully. "Cold Pines is rough country, Miss Elkins. Those loggers, they're good men mostly, but they haven't seen a woman in months. A woman alone with no protection, no standing." He shook his head. "It won't go well." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm trying to protect you." He leaned forward, his face earnest in the firelight. "If word gets out, you're under my protection, working for me, officially living at the main camp under my oversight. Then you're safe. They won't dare touch what's mine." The phrasing made her bristle. "I'm not property, Mr. Calder." "No, you're not. But sometimes we have to work within the world as it is not as we wish it were." His gray eyes held hers. "I need someone to handle mending, cooking, maybe keeping the camp office in order. You need work and protection. Seems like we might help each other." It was practical, sensible, everything her current situation demanded. So why did her heart race at the thought? "I won't be any man's mistress," she said firmly. "Didn't ask you to be. You'll have your own quarters, locked door, my word on it. Any man bothers you, he answers to me." "And what do you get out of it besides mended shirts?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer. Maybe just knowing someone's safe who wouldn't be otherwise. That enough? She studied his profile in the firelight. The strong jaw, the lines carved by weather and responsibility, the surprisingly gentle set of his mouth. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense Thomas had been, but there was something solid about him, something that suggested a man who kept his word. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Fair enough." He stood moving to arrange blankets near the fire. "You take the bed. I'll sleep here." "I couldn't." "You could and you will. That ankle needs to stay elevated." His tone brooked no argument. "I've slept in worse places than a cabin floor, believe me." She limped to the narrow bed, exhaustion hitting her like a wave now that she was warm and fed. The blankets were rough, but clean, smelling of cedar and smoke. "Mr. Calder," she called softly as he banked the fire. "Wes," he corrected. "Yes." "Why were you out on that road tonight? It seems providential." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Maybe it was. Been riding that road every night this week looking for Henderson's lost horse. Tonight I almost turned back early." He paused. "Glad I didn't." She pulled the blankets higher, watching as he settled onto his makeshift bed by the fire. His presence should have frightened her alone with a strange man miles from anywhere. But instead she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. "You'll sleep sounder once you're mine," he'd said. Not as property, but as someone protected, someone who mattered enough to keep safe. As sleep pulled her under, Ruthie thought maybe, just maybe, she understood what he meant. Ruthie woke to the sound of wood being added to the fire. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling, the scent of pine and smoke, the rough blankets. Then it all came back, the abandoned road, the twisted ankle, the man who'd saved her from freezing. "Morning," Wes said without turning from the fireplace. "Snow stopped about an hour ago." She sat up carefully, testing her ankle. Still sore, but the swelling had gone down. Through the single window, she could see pale dawn light filtering through the trees. "How did you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." He stood brushing off his hands. "Coffee's ready. There's water in the basin if you want to wash up." Such simple kindness, offered without expectation. When was the last time someone had thought of her comfort? She couldn't remember. While she tidied herself as best she could with the limited water and her small mirror, Wes busied himself with breakfast preparations. He moved around the small space with economical grace, never bumping into furniture or making unnecessary noise. "You know this cabin well," she observed, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Built it," he said simply. "5 winters back when I first came to manage the camp. Needed somewhere quiet sometimes." She understood that need for solitude. Even in her father's busy shop, she'd treasured the early morning hours when it was just her and her needle and the rising sun through the windows. They ate in companionable silence, more hardtack softened in coffee the last of the dried meat. Simple fare, but she'd learned not to take any meal for granted. "The main camp is 4 miles north," Wes said finally. "We should reach it by mid-morning if the trail's clear. You ready to see what you'd be getting into?" "You're assuming I'll accept your offer." "No," he corrected gently. "I'm giving you the chance to make an informed decision. Can't do that without seeing the place." "Fair enough." She nodded, and they began preparing to leave. Wes insisted on checking her ankle again, his touch clinical but gentle. Satisfied with its condition, he helped her with her boot, lacing it looser than usual to accommodate the residual swelling. The world outside the cabin was transformed. Fresh snow blanketed everything, turning the rough landscape into something from a fairy tale. Pine branches bowed under white weight, and the early sun made everything sparkle like crushed diamonds. "Beautiful," Ruthie breathed, pausing on the cabin's porch. "Wait till you see it from the ridge," Wes said, leading Blackjack from the lean-to where the horse had sheltered. "Whole valley spreads out below like God's own painting." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her as before. This time, she didn't stiffen at the contact. Survival had a way of rearranging priorities. They rode through a forest transformed. Where last night had been darkness and danger, this morning showed a wonderland of white and green. Birds called from the branches, and once she saw a deer watching them from between the trees, its dark eyes liquid and calm. "Not much farther," Wes said as they crested a small rise. "Just around there." The logging camp spread out below them like a small village. A dozen buildings clustered around a central yard, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. She could see men moving between the structures, hear the distant ring of axes and the rough music of saws. "Main house there." Wes pointed to the largest building, 2 stories with a wide porch. "Bunkhouses along the east side. Cookhouse, tool shed, stables. Office is attached to the main house. That's where I work when I'm not out with the crews. It's bigger than I expected. 35 men, give or take. Good operation. We supply timber to the railroad mainly. Steady work, steady pay." As they descended toward the camp, men began to notice their approach. Work slowed, then stopped altogether as loggers gathered to stare. Ruthie became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, her torn dress, her inappropriate position on the horse. "Steady," Wes murmured, sensing her tension. "They're just surprised. Don't see many women up here." He guided Blackjack directly to the main house, ignoring the gathering crowd. As he dismounted, a man emerged from the building, older, with steel-gray hair, and a face like weathered leather. "Wes didn't expect—" He stopped, noticing Ruthie. "Well, Sam, this is Miss Ruth Elkins. Miss Elkins, Sam Morrison, my foreman." Wes helped her down, keeping a steadying hand at her elbow. "Miss Elkins had some trouble on the road. She'll be staying while she recovers." Sam's eyebrows rose, but he touched his cap politely. "Ma'am, welcome to Cold Pines." "Thank you," she managed, aware of the growing crowd of loggers. They kept a respectful distance, but she could feel their curiosity like a physical weight. "Miss Elkins is a seamstress," Wes continued, his voice carrying to the gathered men. "Been thinking we could use someone with those skills around here. Man can only mend his own shirt so many times before they fall apart completely." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. One man called out, "About time, my best shirt's more patches than cloth." "Then it's settled," Wes said firmly. "Miss Elkins will be taking the room at the back of the main house, the one with the lock." He added his tone, making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "Any man needs mending done, he brings it to the office during proper hours. Any man forgets his manners." He didn't finish the threat, but his meaning was clear. The crowd began to disperse, returning to work with backward glances and low murmurs. Wes guided Ruthie into the house, Sam following behind. The interior was rustic but clean, heavy wooden furniture, a large stone fireplace, walls decorated with snowshoes and old traps. Everything spoke of masculine practicality, from the gun rack by the door to the stack of ledgers on a side table. "Through here," Wes said, leading her down a hallway. "This wing's mostly storage and the office. Your room would be at the end." He opened a door to reveal a small but pleasant room, a bed with a proper mattress, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and blessed luxury, a window overlooking the forest. Someone had even placed a rag rug on the floor, its colors faded but cheerful. "It's perfect," Ruthie said softly. "Hasn't been used in years," Sam explained. "Former owner had a daughter who'd visit summers. That was before—" He stopped, glancing at Wes. "Before she died," Wes finished quietly. "Fever took the whole family. I bought the operation from the estate." Ruthie touched the quilt on the bed, handmade with careful stitches. Someone had loved this room once. "I'll leave you to settle in," Wes said. "Rest that ankle. When you're ready, come find me in the office and we'll discuss terms." He left with Sam, their voices fading down the hall. Ruthie sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life had taken. Yesterday she'd been facing death on a frozen road. Today she had a room, a potential job, and the protection of a man who asked nothing from her but honest work. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress in the wardrobe, placing her mother's Bible on the small shelf by the bed. The silver bracelet caught the morning light as she moved, reminding her of her mother's strength. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Elkins, it's Sam. Brought you some things." She opened the door to find the foreman holding a stack of clothing. "Wes thought you might need— that is, these were left behind. Figured they might do till you can make something proper." The clothes were simple but clean, 2 wool skirts, several shirtwaists, a heavy shawl. Working women's clothes, practical and warm. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched. "This is very kind." Sam shifted uncomfortably. "Wes is a good man, miss. Fair, keeps his word. You can trust that." "I'm beginning to see that." After he left, she changed into one of the borrowed outfits. The skirt was a bit long, the waist a bit loose, but nothing she couldn't alter. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. Gone was the St. Louis shopkeeper's daughter. In her place stood a woman of the frontier, ready for whatever came next. She found the office easily enough, following the sound of pen on paper. Wes sat behind a large desk, ledgers spread before him, looking incongruous with reading spectacles perched on his nose. "Suits you," he said, glancing up at her borrowed clothes. "Have a seat. Let's talk business." He removed his spectacles, folding them carefully. "Here's what I propose. Room and board plus $1 a day for mending and keeping the office in order. You'll take your meals in the cookhouse with the men, but I'll make it clear you're under my protection. Any man gives you trouble, you come straight to me." "That's generous," she said carefully. "Perhaps too generous." "It's fair. These men destroy clothes like you wouldn't believe. You'll earn every penny." He leaned back in his chair. "There's more, though. Sam's wife used to do the camp washing, but her rheumatism's got too bad. If you're willing to take that on too, it's another 50 cents a day." The numbers spun in her head. It was more than she'd ever earned in the shop, even during the best times. "I accept." "Good." He pulled out a ledger, making notations in neat, precise handwriting. "One more thing. That story about your cousin, best keep it simple. You came looking for work, I hired you. Nothing about being abandoned on the road or traveling alone. Men here respect strength, not sob stories." She nodded, understanding the wisdom of it. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow, if your ankle's up to it. Today you rest. Get familiar with the camp. The men'll be curious, but they'll be respectful. I'll see to that." He stood, and she noticed again how he seemed to fill the room without trying. Not just his physical size, but something about his presence, solid, unshakable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Really?" He considered the question, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Maybe because I know what it's like to need a second chance. Maybe because this camp could use some civilizing. Or maybe... He paused, then shook his head. Doesn't matter why. What matters is you're safe and you've got work. Rest is just details. She left the office feeling oddly unsettled. There was more to Wesley Calder than met the eye depth she couldn't quite fathom. But Sam was right, he was a man who kept his word. For now, that was enough. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She met Cookie the camp cook, a grizzled man with a wooden leg, who immediately began listing all the men whose table manners needed correction. She explored the camp boundaries, careful to stay within sight of the buildings. She watched the men work, fascinated by the choreographed danger of falling trees and singing saws. That evening, entering the cookhouse for supper was like walking into a wall of silence. 35 men stopped mid-conversation to stare. Wes rose from his place at the head table, gesturing to an empty chair beside him. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "you all know Miss Elkins will be handling mending and washing. Mind your manners, and she might even teach some of you to sew on your own buttons." The tension broke with laughter. Men nodded politely, some even tipping their caps. Dinner was simple but plentiful: venison stew, fresh bread, canned peaches for dessert. The men's initial reserve gave way to careful friendliness, especially when she admired the complicated patching job one had done on his jacket. As the meal ended and men began filing out, one younger logger approached hesitantly. "Miss Elkins, I got a shirt that's, well, it's pretty bad. When could I—" "Bring it to the office tomorrow morning," she said kindly. "I'll see what can be done." His face lit up. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." After he left, Wes smiled slightly. "Word'll spread. You'll have more mending than you know what to do with by week's end." "Good. I like to keep busy." They walked back to the main house together, the night air crisp and clear. Stars were just beginning to appear above the tree line. "You did well today," Wes said quietly. "Not every woman could walk into a camp full of rough men and hold her own." "I faced worse," she said, thinking of the humiliation of Thomas's rejection, the despair of her father's death, the terror of that frozen road. "I believe you have." He stopped at her door. "Lock this behind me. Breakfast is at dawn. Cookie doesn't hold the meal for anyone. Sleep well, Miss Elkins." "Ruthie," she corrected impulsively. "If we're to work together, you should call me Ruthie." Something shifted in his expression, too quick to read. "Ruthie, then. Good night." Alone in her room, she sat on the bed and really thought about what she'd agreed to. A logging camp in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by rough men, protected only by the word of a stranger. Her mother would have been scandalized. But her mother would also have survived. Ruthie touched the silver bracelet, drawing strength from its familiar weight. She'd been given a chance, unexpected, unconventional, but real. Tomorrow she'd begin earning her keep, proving she belonged here. As she prepared for bed, Wes's words echoed in her mind. "You'll sleep sounder once you're mine. Not owned, but protected. Not possessed, but safe." For the first time in months, she slept without fear. The mending pile grew as Wes had predicted. By the end of her first week, Ruthie had a mountain of torn shirts, ripped trousers, and jackets held together by hope and twine. She set up her workstation in a corner of the office, where the light was best, arranging her precious needles and thread with the same care she'd once displayed bolts of silk in her father's shop. Young Timothy Harper was first in line that initial morning, clutching a shirt that looked like it had lost a fight with a wildcat. "Can you save it, miss?" he asked, hopefully. "It's my good shirt. Well, my only shirt that ain't for working." Ruthie examined the damage, 3 major tears and a pocket hanging by a thread. "I'll do my best, Mr. Harper. Come back Thursday." His face fell. "Thursday? But there's a dance in Willow Creek Saturday." "Then I suppose I'd better have it ready by Friday," she said with a small smile. Word of that interaction spread through the camp like wildfire. By noon, she had commitments for 2 weeks' worth of work, each man careful to mention why his particular item was urgent. She began to understand the rhythm of their lives: Saturday trips to town, monthly visits home, the occasional dance or social that required good clothes. Wes observed it all from his desk, occasionally glancing up from his ledgers with what might have been amusement. He'd been true to his word about protection. The men were unfailingly polite. removing their caps when they entered, watching their language, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're spoiling them," he commented one afternoon as she carefully embroidered a small design over a particularly stubborn patch. Jake Morrison never cared about his appearance before. "Everyone deserves to feel presentable," she replied, not looking up from her work. "Even loggers." Especially loggers, apparently. He returned to his figures, but she caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable. The days settled into a routine. Up before dawn breakfast in the cookhouse, where she'd earned a permanent seat at Wes's table. Mornings were for mending the steady rhythm of her needle, a meditation. Afternoons she handled the washing hard work that left her shoulders aching but her mind clear. Evenings were for smaller repairs and increasingly for teaching some of the younger men basic stitching. "Like this," she demonstrated to a group gathered in the cookhouse after supper. "Small even stitches. It's not hard once you get the rhythm." "My ma tried to teach me," one admitted. "Said I had hands like hams." "Your hands fell a tree this morning," Ruthie reminded him. "They can manage a needle." It became a regular thing, these evening lessons. Men who'd faced down grizzlies and raging rivers sat hunched over scraps of fabric tongues, poking out in concentration as they attempted to master the running stitch. Wes joined them one night, settling his large frame onto a bench with the others. "Figure I should learn too," he said when she expressed surprise. "Can't have my men showing me up." It was a quick study, his hands steady and surprisingly gentle with the fabric. She found herself leaning closer than necessary to correct his grip, caught the scent of pipe tobacco and pine that seemed to cling to him. "You're a natural," she said, her voice coming out oddly breathless. "Good teacher," he replied simply, but his eyes held hers a moment too long. 3 weeks into her stay, Ruthie discovered why the back room had a lock. She'd been returning from the wash house late, arms full of clean clothes, when she heard voices from the shadows between buildings. "Pretty little thing," someone said. "Wasted on mending shirts. Bet she's lonely all by herself in that big house. Wes ain't always around." She froze, recognizing the voice of Bart Collins, one of the newer hires. Her heart hammered as footsteps moved closer. Then Wes was there, materializing from the darkness like an avenging spirit. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone sent the men scattering. "You all right?" he asked quietly, taking the bundle of clothes from her trembling arms. "Yes, they didn't. They were just talking." Talk leads to action if it's not stopped early. His jaw was tight with controlled anger. "Collins won't be a problem anymore." "You're not going to fire him already done. Sam's escorting him off the property now." He walked her to her door, waiting while she fumbled with the key. "This is why the lock, Ruthie. Use it." She nodded, shaken more than she wanted to admit. Before she could close the door, he spoke again. "You're under my protection. That means something here. But it also means being careful. No more late trips to the wash house alone. Take Jimmy or one of the younger boys if I'm not around. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." His voice was firm. "You're important. To the camp," he added quickly. "The men, they're different since you came. Better." She wanted to ask if she was important to him specifically, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded and closed the door, turning the lock with fingers that still shook slightly. The next morning, Collins was gone, and if the men looked at her with even more respect, well, that was Wes's doing too. As autumn progressed, the relationship between them shifted subtly. He began joining her during the quiet afternoon hours when the men were out cutting. She'd mend while he worked on accounts, comfortable silence broken only by the scratch of his pen and the whisper of her thread through fabric. "You never told me," she said one day, "how you came to be here." He looked up from his ledger, considering. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Virginia. War came, I fought. War ended, I drifted. Learned logging in Oregon, saved my pay, heard about this place for sale." He shrugged. "Been here 6 years now." "No family. None that claims me." His tone suggested that door was closed. "You miss it, your old life." She thought about it, needle pausing. "I miss feeling settled, having a place that's truly mine, but the life itself..." She shook her head. That girl who wore silk dresses and served tea to ladies seems like someone else now. You've adapted well. I had a good example, she said, glancing at him. You took a chance on a stranger. Not many would have. Wasn't much of a chance. Could see your strength that first night, half frozen and proud as a queen. He returned to his figures, but she caught the slight smile. Besides, the men would revolt now if you left. Clean clothes have spoiled them for their old ways. She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. Heaven forbid they go back to washing their own clothes in the creek. Or wearing shirts more whole than fabric. He set down his pen, studying her. You've made a difference here, Ruthie. Want you to know that? The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Sam burst through the door with news of an equipment problem, and the spell broke. But something had shifted. The first snow of real winter came early October, barely half gone. Ruthie woke to a world transformed once again, the camp blanketed in white. At breakfast, the men were subdued, knowing what winter meant. Harder work, dangerous conditions, isolation. Seasons changing, Cookie observed, serving up extra portions of porridge. Hope folks are prepared. Ruthie thought of her thin shawl, her worn boots, and said nothing. She'd make do, she always had. But that afternoon, a package appeared on her workstation. Inside were new boots, thick and sturdy, clearly ordered from town. A wool cloak, practical but well made. Gloves lined with rabbit fur. No note, but she knew. When she looked up, Wes was bent over his ledgers, apparently absorbed in calculations. Thank you, she said softly. He glanced up as if surprised. For what? Wes. Can't have my seamstress freezing, he said gruffly. Bad for business. She smiled, recognizing the deflection for what it was. Of course, bad for business. That evening after supper, she wore the new cloak to the wash house. The men noticed they noticed everything, but said nothing directly. Young Timothy Harper did mention that it was good she'd be warm for the winter, and several others nodded agreement. Take care of our Miss Ruthie, Jake Morrison added. She takes care of us. Walking back through the falling snow, Ruthie felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the new cloak. She belonged here. These rough men had accepted her, protected her, made her part of their isolated community. And Wes had given her more than shelter and work. He'd given her a chance to prove herself to be valued for her skills rather than her dowry or connections. He asked nothing but honest work, offered respect and protection without conditions. She found him on the porch of the main house, smoking his evening pipe and watching the snow fall. Peaceful, she observed, joining him. Won't last. Winter comes hard here. You sure you want to stay? The question surprised her. Where else would I go? Town's not that far. Could set up a shop there, proper seamstress work for proper ladies. Is that what you want for me to leave? He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. But I want you to choose to stay, not feel trapped by circumstance. I chose the night you offered me work, she said firmly. I choose every morning when I wake up here. This is my home now. He turned to look at her, then something raw and vulnerable in his gray eyes. Ruthie. The men need their mending done, she continued, keeping her tone light despite her racing heart. Cookie needs someone to keep them civilized at meals, and you... She paused, gathering courage. You need someone to make sure you don't work yourself to death in that office. That's so. Besides, she added, pulling the cloak closer, you invested in winter clothes for me. Be ashamed to waste them. He laughed, then a rare sound that transformed his face. Practical woman. I've learned to be. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. The camp settled for the night, around them lanterns going out one by one, until only the necessary lights remained. You should get inside, Wes said eventually. Stay warm. She turned to go, then paused. Wes, that first night when you said I'd sleep sounder, you were right. I do. Before he could respond, she slipped inside, leaving him alone with the snow and whatever thoughts kept him standing watch in the cold. In her room, Ruthie touched the silver bracelet, thinking of her mother. Margaret Elkins had raised her daughter to be a lady, but more than that, she'd raised her to be strong, to survive, to recognize good men from bad. Wesley Calder was a good man. More than good, he was the kind of man who saw a desperate woman on a frozen road and offered not charity, but dignity. The kind who protected without possessing, who gave without expecting payment in kind. The kind of man she could love if she let herself. But that was a thought for another day. For now, it was enough to be safe valued home. The rest would unfold as it would like fabric under her steady needle, one careful stitch at a time. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the camp in pristine white. And in her small room at the back of the main house door, locked and fire burning bright, Ruthie Elkins slept sound. The first hard freeze came in early November, turning the wash water to ice overnight and making the simple task of laundry a battle. Ruthie's hands, already roughened from work, cracked and bled despite the salve Cookie gave her. She said nothing, wrapping them in strips of cloth and carrying on. But Wes noticed. He noticed everything. "Show me," he commanded one evening, catching her flexing her sore fingers after supper. "It's nothing." "Ruthie?" Just her name, but the tone brooked no argument. Reluctantly, she unwound the makeshift bandages. Her palms were raw knuckles split from the cold and lye soap. He took her hands in his, turning them gently to examine the damage. "Why didn't you say something? Everyone has hardships here. I won't be the weak link." His thumb brushed over an particularly angry split feather light. "Strength isn't about suffering in silence. It's about knowing when to accept help." He retrieved a tin of thick salve from his room, something that smelled of pine tar and herbs. His hands were impossibly gentle as he worked it into her damaged skin, focused entirely on the task. "My mother made this," he said quietly. "Sent a new batch every winter until she passed." It was the first time he'd mentioned family voluntarily. Ruthie held still, afraid any movement might break the spell of his openness. "She'd have liked you," he continued, wrapping her hands with clean, soft bandages. "Said a woman's worth was in her spine, not her silks." "She sounds wise." "She was." He released her hands but didn't move away. "Tomorrow you teach Jimmy how to manage the washing. You supervise until these heal." "But—" "No arguments. Can't have my seamstress unable to hold a needle." That night, unable to sleep from the throbbing in her hands, Ruthie heard his footsteps in the hall, pausing outside her door. After a moment, they moved on, but she found comfort in knowing he was keeping watch. The next morning brought a surprise. Several of the younger men had rigged a new washing system, pulleys and levers that made the work easier, requiring less direct contact with the harsh soap. "Wes's idea," Timothy Harper explained proudly. "Drew it up last night, had us building before dawn." She found Wes in the office, bent over his ledgers as usual. "Thank you," she said simply. He glanced up. "For what?" "The washing system." "Made sense, protecting my investment." But his eyes were warm as he said it. "Just an investment." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "You know better than that." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before either could speak again, Sam burst in with news of a tree that had fallen wrong, narrowly missing 2 men. The moment shattered, but something had been acknowledged that couldn't be taken back. As November progressed, their evening conversations grew longer. After the camp settled for the night, Ruthie would often find Wes reading by the fire. She'd bring her mending working by lamplight while he read aloud from whatever book occupied him, poetry sometimes, or accounts of far-off places. "You ever think about traveling?" she asked one night as he finished a chapter about the South Seas. "Used to. War cured me of wanting to see new places." He closed the book, studying the cover. "You?" "I thought I'd see San Francisco once. Thomas—" She stopped, his name foreign on her tongue after so long. "Your fiancé?" She'd never told him about Thomas directly, but somehow he knew. Perhaps the men talked, or perhaps he simply understood the kind of loss that brought a woman alone to the frontier. "Former fiancé. He had plans for us to go after we married. See the ocean," he said. She focused on her stitching. "Funny how plans change." "His loss," Wes said quietly. "I'm not sure he'd agree." "Then he's a fool." The conviction in his voice made her look up. "Any man who could walk away from you doesn't deserve the breath it takes to speak his name." Her needle stilled. Wes, I know. He stood abruptly, moving to tend the fire. I know what I promised. Protection without expectations. I meant it. Still do. What if, she swallowed hard, what if I want to renegotiate? He turned slowly, his face unreadable in the firelight. Ruthie, you don't owe me. This isn't about owing. She set aside her mending, standing to face him. When you found me on that road, I was running from a life that had disappointed me. But somewhere along the way, I stopped running and started building. Here, with you. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just out of reach. You sure this life, it's not easy, isolated, hard. Show me an easy life, and I'll show you a lie. She took a step closer. I'm not looking for easy anymore. I'm looking for real. His hand came up to cup her cheek, work-roughened thumb gentle against her skin. You terrify me, he admitted. Haven't felt this since before the war. Thought that part of me died somewhere in Virginia mud. But it didn't. No, it was just waiting, for you. He kissed her, then soft and careful, as if she might shatter. She made a small sound and pressed closer, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. I should go, she whispered. You should, he agreed, but neither moved. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up sparks, breaking the spell. Ruthie stepped back, touching her lips briefly before fleeing to her room. Behind her closed door, she pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. What had she done? The careful balance of their arrangement, the safety of defined roles, she'd upset all of it with a moment's boldness. But she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The next day, she expected awkwardness, but Wes treated her exactly as before, respectful, friendly, professional. Only his eyes gave him away, following her when he thought she wasn't looking dark with something that made her stomach flutter. The men noticed, of course. Nothing escaped their attention in the close quarters of the camp. Boss seems distracted, Jake Morrison observed at dinner. Almost smiled at breakfast. Leave it be, Sam warned, but his own eyes twinkled. That evening, a blizzard moved in, fierce enough to keep everyone indoors. The men gathered in the cookhouse, playing cards and telling increasingly tall tales. Ruthie worked on a particularly complex repair, squinting in the lamplight. You'll ruin your eyes, Wes said, appearing at her elbow. It needs to be done. Davidson needs this shirt for his trip home next week. Not if he can't get through the passes. He gestured to the windows, now white with driven snow. This storm settling in for days. As if to emphasize his point, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows. Several men looked up uneasily. Reminds me of 64 inches, one of the older loggers said. Trapped in camp for 2 weeks. Nearly ate each other by the end. We're better supplied now, Cookie assured them. Though if anyone wants to complain about my cooking, that can be arranged. Laughter eased the tension, but Ruthie noticed Wes's concerned expression. He moved through the room, checking with Sam about supplies, organizing work details for keeping paths clear, ensuring everyone knew the emergency protocols. A natural leader, she thought, watching him calm and direct with quiet authority. The men respected him not from fear, but from trust, knowing he'd put their welfare above profit every time. Miss Ruthie, Timothy Harper approached hesitantly. I was wondering, that is, some of us were talking, would you maybe read to us like you did that one time from the Bible? She glanced around at the expectant faces. These rough men, some who couldn't read themselves, hungry for stories to pass the storm. Of course. She retrieved her mother's Bible from her room, settling into a chair by the stove. Any requests? Something with adventure, someone called out. David and Goliath. Jonah and the whale. The Christmas story, a quiet voice suggested. Haven't heard it proper in years. Though Christmas was still weeks away, Ruthie turned to Luke. Her voice, trained by years of reading to her father when his eyes failed, carried clearly through the room. The men settled, some working on their own mending projects, others simply listening. She felt Wes watching from his place by the window. When she glanced up, he gave her a small nod of approval that warmed her more than the stove. The storm raged for 3 days. Routines adapted paths shoveled between buildings, work shifts focused on keeping roofs clear and stock fed. Ruthie's mending pile grew as men found time to bring her projects they'd been putting off. On the second night, she found Wes alone in the office, staring at a letter with an expression she'd never seen before. Bad news. He looked up, seeming to return from far away. Old news, from a friend in Virginia, forwarded through 3 addresses to find me. She waited, not pushing. My brother died, he said flatly. 2 years ago, left a widow and 3 children. She's asking if there's anything. He crumpled the letter. 2 years, and I'm just learning of it. I'm sorry. We weren't close. Different sides in the war. He laughed bitterly. Last words we spoke were curses. She moved around the desk, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. War makes enemies of brothers. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I chose my side. Chose to fight against everything he believed in. You chose your conscience. That's all any of us can do. He covered her hand with his. She included a photograph. The children. His voice broke slightly. They have my mother's eyes. What will you do? Send money. What else can I do? I'm dead to that world. He straightened, rebuilding his walls. It's better they don't know me. Wes. Leave it, Ruthie, please. She squeezed his shoulder gently, then returned to her chair. They sat in silence while the storm howled outside, each lost in thoughts of family lost and roads not taken. The third morning dawned clear and brilliantly cold. The men emerged like bears from hibernation, eager to attack the massive snowdrifts. Ruthie helped Cookie prepare a massive breakfast, knowing they'd need the fuel. Storms passed, Sam announced. But there's another system building to the west. Winter's here for real now. Wes organized teams for clearing the road to town, checking on the horses, assessing damage. He moved with purpose, but Ruthie caught him staring east sometimes toward a Virginia he'd never see again. That evening, she found him on the porch, despite the cold pipe smoke curling into the crystal air. You'll freeze, she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. Just thinking about your brother. About choices, roads taken. He glanced at her. I told you war cured me of wanting to see new places. That wasn't true. War cured me of thinking I had a place to go back to. So you built a new place? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Ruthie, what I said the other night about you terrifying me, I meant it. I've built walls for years, kept everyone at proper distance. Then you came along and somehow slipped past every defense. Is that so bad? I don't know. I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be otherwise. She moved closer, not quite touching. I'm not asking you to be anything but what you are, Wes. I've had enough of men who promise grand futures. I'd rather have an honest present. He turned to her, then studying her face in the moonlight. You deserve better than a scarred ex-soldier hiding in the mountains. I deserve, she said firmly, a man who sees my worth beyond my dowry, who offers protection without possession, who notices when my hands hurt and builds solutions. She smiled slightly. I believe I found him. Ruthie. I know we agreed to terms. Professional arrangement. But Wes, She stopped, heart pounding. I care for you more than I should, more than is wise. Wisdom, he said slowly, is overrated. This time when he kissed her, there was nothing tentative about it. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted against him despite the cold. When they parted, her knees were weak. Come inside, he said roughly. You're shivering. But she wasn't cold at all. The strangers arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before Christmas. Ruthie was in the cookhouse helping prepare the midday meal when she heard the commotion, horses' unfamiliar voices, and the sudden silence that fell over the working men. Through the frost-covered window, she saw them 3 men in city clothes looking out of place against the snow and rough timber buildings. One wore a fur-collared coat that probably cost more than most loggers saw in a year. Another carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The third, her blood turned to ice. Even from this distance, even after 18 months, she recognized Thomas Garrett. Miss Ruthie Cookie noticed her stillness. You all right? She forced herself to breathe. "I need to find Wes." But Wes was already striding across the yard, Sam at his side. She watched him intercept the strangers, his posture radiating controlled authority. Words were exchanged too low to hear, but she saw Thomas gesture toward the main house, then scan the camp as if searching for her. "Stay here," Cookie said quietly, understanding more than she'd told him. "I'll send Jimmy to fetch you when it's safe." But hiding felt like cowardice. She'd run once from Thomas Garrett. She wouldn't run again. She removed her apron with steady hands, smoothed her hair, and walked out into the cold morning air. The men of the camp had stopped all pretense of working, watching the drama unfold with protective interest. Thomas saw her immediately. His face still handsome in that polished way she'd once admired, registered shock. Perhaps he'd expected to find her broken desperate. Instead, she stood straight in her simple wool dress, hands steady meeting his gaze without flinching. "Ruth," he called, starting toward her. "Thank God. We've come to take you home." Wes stepped smoothly into his path. "The lady's name is Miss Elkins, and she is home." Thomas's companion, a lawyer by his look, cleared his throat. "Mr. Calder, I presume I'm Josiah Hartwell, representing Mr. Garrett's interests. We've had quite a time tracking Miss Elkins down. Her former landlady in St. Louis finally remembered she'd mentioned Cold Pines." "Fascinating," Wes said dryly. "State your business." Thomas pushed forward. "My business is with my fiancé." "Former fiancé," Ruthie said, clearly stepping closer but still keeping Wes between them. "You ended our engagement quite definitively, Thomas. Or have you forgotten?" "That was a misunderstanding," Thomas said quickly. "Times were difficult, I was under pressure, but circumstances have changed. My uncle passed, left me his shipping concern. I'm in a position now to provide the life you deserve." "The life I deserve." She tasted the words like bitter medicine. "Tell me, Thomas, what life is that—" "Come now, Ruth. Living in a logging camp." "Doing whatever it is you do here." His eyes flicked dismissively over her work-worn hands. "This isn't you." "You're right," she agreed. "The woman you knew wouldn't have survived here. She was weak, sheltered, dependent on others' opinions for her worth. That woman is gone." "Ruth." "Miss Elkins," Wes corrected again, his voice carrying warning. The third stranger, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. He was older, with shrewd eyes and an expensive hat. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere private. I'm Harold Morrison, Mr. Garrett's business partner. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies everyone." "Arrangement," Sam spoke up for the first time. "Miss Ruthie ain't for sale, if that's what you're suggesting." A murmur of agreement ran through the gathered loggers. They'd shifted positions subtly, forming a loose circle that was protective without being overtly threatening. Morrison raised his hands placatingly. "Of course not. I simply meant that Miss Elkins might be more comfortable discussing personal matters away from an audience." "I'm perfectly comfortable where I am," Ruthie said. "Among friends who've shown me more genuine respect in 6 months than you did in 3 years, Thomas." Thomas's face flushed. "You can't prefer this wilderness to what I'm offering. I've come all this way." "Nobody asked you to," Jake Morrison called out. Several men chuckled. "Ruth, please." Thomas tried a different tack, his voice softening to the tone she remembered from their courtship. "I know I hurt you, but we had something real once. We could have it again." "What we had," Ruthie said slowly, "was an arrangement based on mutual benefit. You wanted my father's connections, I wanted security. When both disappeared, so did you." "That's not—" "Do you deny," Wes interrupted, "that you ended your engagement when Miss Elkins' circumstances changed?" Thomas glanced at his companions, then back. It was a difficult time for everyone. "Yes or no?" "The situations were complicated." "Yes or no?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Yes, but—" "Then you have no claim here." Wes's voice was final. "The lady has made her position clear." Hartwell, the lawyer, produced a document. "Actually, there may be some question about that. We've discovered that Miss Elkins' father died with certain debts outstanding. as his sole heir. How much? Wes asked. I beg your pardon. The debts. How much? Hartwell consulted his papers. $437 with interest. Done. Wes turned to Sam. Draw a bank draft from the company account. Now wait a minute, Thomas sputtered. You can't just... I'm purchasing the debts, Wes said calmly. Standard business practice. Miss Elkins can repay me through her work here on terms we'll arrange privately. That's not why we came, Morrison interjected. Mr. Garrett's offer is marriage, not monetary. An offer I decline, Ruthie said firmly. Mr. Calder's arrangement suits me better. Thomas's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. You're staying here for him. His eyes narrowed as he took in the protective way Wes stood the familiar ease between them. I see. You've found another protector. Tell me, Ruth, what exactly are your duties here? The implied insult was clear. Several loggers growled, and Timothy Harper actually took a step forward before Sam caught his arm. Have a care, Wes said softly, dangerously. You're speaking about a lady. A lady living unchaperoned among dozens of men working as a... Thomas gestured dismissively. Whatever she calls herself. Seamstress. Cookie supplied loudly. Best damn seamstress in Montana territory. Also helps with the books teaching the boys their letters and keeping us civilized. She reads to us from the Bible, another man added. Real proper-like. Taught me to sew on buttons, someone else called. My ma would be proud. Thomas looked around at the earnest faces, clearly not expecting this response. You can't all be serious. Serious as winter, Sam said. Miss Ruthie's part of this camp, under Mr. Calder's protection and ours. Any man who says different answers to all of us. The threat was implicit, but unmistakable. Thomas took an involuntary step back. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Ruth, you can't want this life. Washing loggers' clothes, mending their shirts, you were meant for better. Better. Ruthie moved past Wes for the first time, facing her former fiancé directly. You mean China tea services and calling cards, gossip circles and worrying about the cut of my sleeves, empty promises from men who value bank accounts over character. That's not fair, isn't it? She pulled back her sleeve, showing hands roughened by work, but strong, capable. These hands have built something real here, Thomas. They've mended more than clothes. They've helped mend men's pride in their appearance, their connection to distant families through letters home. That's worth more than any life you're offering. You're making a mistake, Thomas said desperately. When this infatuation passes, when you tire of the isolation and hardship, then I'll face that honestly, as I've faced everything else. She stepped back to Wes's side, not touching but clearly aligned. But I won't return to a life built on pretense and conditional affection. Morrison cleared his throat. If the lady's made her decision, though I must ask Mr. Calder what exactly is your relationship with Miss Elkins. She's under my protection, Wes said simply. Yes, but in what capacity, as employer-benefactor or something more intimate? The camp held its breath. Ruthie felt Wes tense beside her, knew he was weighing how much to reveal. That's our business, she said before he could answer. Mr. Calder has been nothing but honorable, more than I can say for some. Thomas's face darkened. Don't come crying to me when he tires of you too, Ruth. When you're older, worn out from this hard life with nothing to show for it. That's enough. Wes's voice cut like a blade. You've said your piece. Time to leave. We're not done here, Hartwell protested. There are legal matters. Send any paperwork to the camp. I'll handle Miss Elkins' debts. Wes gestured to Sam. Escort these gentlemen to their horses. Thomas made one last attempt. Ruth, please. I'm offering you marriage respectability, a return to your rightful place. My rightful place, Ruthie said quietly, is wherever I choose to make it, and I choose here. The finality in her voice must have reached him at last. His shoulders slumped, the fight going out of him. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret, she replied, is not seeing your true nature sooner. Morrison touched Thomas's arm. Come, we've wasted enough time. The three men mounted their horses, Thomas casting one last look back. What he saw Ruthie standing proud among the rough loggers, Wes solid beside her, the entire camp united in protection, must have told him everything. He turned away without another word. They watched until the riders disappeared into the trees. Slowly, the camp released its collective breath. "Well," Cookie said into the silence, "that was better than a penny dreadful. Now who wants lunch?" The spell broke. Men dispersed back to work, though not without pats on Ruthie's shoulder or nods of approval. She stood frozen, the reality of what just happened crashing over her. "Come on," Wes said quietly, guiding her toward the main house. "You're shaking." Inside his office, away from watching eyes, she finally let herself tremble. "He found me. After all this time, he found me." "But you sent him away." Wes poured whiskey from a bottle he kept for medicinal purposes, pressing the glass into her hands. "Drink." The liquor burned, but it steadied her. $400, Wes. That's too much." "It's done." He sat on the edge of his desk, watching her. "Did you mean it, what you said out there?" "Every word. Even the part about choosing here, choosing." He stopped. "Choosing you." She set down the glass, meeting his eyes. "Especially that part." He pulled her into his arms, then holding her as the last of her trembles subsided. She breathed in his familiar scent, pipe tobacco, wood smoke, safety. "I wanted to hit him," he admitted against her hair. "When he implied what he implied. The men would have beaten you to it." She pulled back enough to see his face. "Did you see Timothy, ready to defend my honor with his bare hands? You've won their loyalty. That's no small thing." "And yours." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "You've had that since the night I found you in the snow. Just took me a while to admit it." She turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss there. "What happens now, the debt?" "Is a business arrangement, like I said. We'll work out terms. Fair ones." He smiled slightly. "Though I might require interest in the form of continued mending services." "Usurious rates," she teased, feeling lighter now that Thomas was gone. "Market value." He grew serious again. "Ruthie, what Morrison said about our relationship. The camp's been patient, but talk will start now. Questions about propriety, your reputation." "Let them talk." She stepped back but caught his hands. "Unless, does it bother you, the assumptions people might make?" "The only thing that bothers me," he said carefully, "is that they might be wrong." Her heart skipped. "Wrong how?" "Wrong in thinking I have any claim on you beyond protection. Wrong in thinking you might—" He stopped, struggling with words. "That I might love you," she supplied softly. His hands tightened on hers. "Do you—" "Wes Calder," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "I've loved you since you wrapped your coat around me on that freezing ride, since you gave me work instead of charity. Since you noticed my hurt hands and built solutions. How could I not—" "Ruthie." His voice was rough. "I'm not an easy man. I have scars inside and out, nights when the war comes back, a past that won't stay buried. And I'm a woman with debts, no family, and hands too rough for polite society," she countered. "We're quite a pair." "We are," he agreed, pulling her close again. "Question is, what do we do about it?" Before she could answer, someone cleared their throat in the doorway. Sam stood there grinning broadly. "Sorry to interrupt, but the men are taking up a collection. Figure if we all chip in, we can cover Miss Ruthie's debt ourselves. Keep it in the family, so to speak." Ruthie felt tears threaten again. "Sam, I can't—" "Sure you can. Boys already decided. You're ours to look after, same as you look after us." He tipped his hat. "Just thought you should know." After he left, Ruthie buried her face in Wes's chest, overwhelmed. "They're good men." "The best." He stroked her hair. "Though I might have to arm wrestle them for the right to pay your debt myself." She laughed wetly. "My heroes fighting over who gets to save me." "Not save," he corrected. "You saved yourself the night you chose to survive. We're just helping with the details." She lifted her head to kiss him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they parted, both were breathless. "Marry me," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" Marry me, he repeated more firmly. Not because of Thomas or propriety or what anyone thinks. Because I love you. Because you make this place home instead of just shelter. Because I can't imagine facing another winter without you. Wes, I know it's not much of an offer. A logging camp instead of a city house. Hard work instead of leisure. But Ruthie, I promise you'll never doubt your worth again. You'll never wonder if you're wanted for yourself instead of your connections or dowry. You'll... She stopped him with a kiss. Yes. Yes? Yes, Wesley Calder, I'll marry you. In your logging camp with your wonderful rough men as witnesses wearing a dress I mended myself. She smiled brilliantly. I can't imagine anything more perfect. He crushed her to him, and she felt him shake slightly. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. We'll tell the men at dinner, he said. They'll want to celebrate. Cookie will probably cry, don't tell him I said that. Our secret. She smoothed his shirt where she'd crushed it. Though I think they already suspect. Sam's grin said everything. Observant bunch. He kept her close as if afraid she might vanish. No regrets, you could have had an easier life. I told Thomas the truth, she said firmly. Easy lives are built on lies. I'll take hard truth over easy fiction every time. My practical Ruthie. Your Ruthie, she agreed. That has a nice sound. Outside, they heard whooping. Through the window, they saw Sam apparently spreading newsmen throwing their hats in the air, Cookie doing what might generously be called a dance. So much for waiting until dinner, Wes observed. Let them celebrate. Ruthie leaned into his solid warmth. They've earned it. We all have. As the camp erupted in joy, Thomas Garrett and his empty promises already fading like last year's snow, Ruthie thought of her mother's bracelet. It had seen hard times before, would see them again. But it had also seen this love found in unexpected places, community forged from outcasts, home built from courage and trust. She was exactly where she belonged. The smell of smoke woke her. Ruthie sat bolt upright in the darkness, her heart already racing before her mind caught up. That wasn't chimney smoke or pipe tobacco. It was the acrid scent of wood burning where it shouldn't. Fire! The cry came from outside, followed by the clanging of the dinner bell used for emergencies. Fire in the tool shed! She threw on her wrapper and boots, grabbing the wool blanket from her bed. Through her window, she could see orange light flickering against the snow. Men were already running their shouts, mixing with the crackle of flames. The tool shed was fully engaged by the time she reached the yard. Flames licked up the walls and through the roof, sending sparks into the night sky. The men had formed a bucket brigade from the water barrel, but it was clearly a losing battle. Let it go, Wes shouted over the noise. It's too far gone. Wet down the buildings on either side, keep it from spreading. Ruthie joined the line, passing buckets, her hands soon numb from the cold water. Beside her, Timothy Harper worked with desperate efficiency, his young face orange in the firelight. How did it start? She asked between buckets. Don't know. Johnny saw the flames when he went to check the horses. He passed another bucket. Could have been a lantern left burning, but... A crash interrupted as part of the roof collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. Men jumped back, then redoubled their efforts to wet the surrounding buildings. The main house, someone yelled. Sparks on the main house roof! Ruthie's blood froze. The main house, their records, their winter supplies, her room with everything she owned. I'll go, she said, already moving. Like hell you will. Wes caught her arm. Sam, take 5 men and get up there with wet blankets. Smother anything that catches. The next hour was a blur of smoke and water and controlled panic. They managed to keep the fire contained to the tool shed, though several times sparks threatened other buildings. By the time the flames finally died to smoldering embers, everyone was exhausted, soaked, and reeking of smoke. Anyone hurt? Wes called out as the men gathered in the yard. Johnny's got a burn on his hand, Cookie reported. Nothing serious. I'll tend it. Good. Wes surveyed the damage, his face grim in the dawn light. We lost the shed, and everything in it axes, saws, spare equipment. That's a season's profit gone. We'll make do, Sam said. Share tools, work extra shifts. Boss. Jake Morrison interrupted, holding something in his hand. "Found this by the back of the shed." It was a torch partially burned but clearly fashioned rather than accidental. The men gathered closer understanding, spreading through the group. "Someone said it," Timothy said, voicing what they all thought. "Deliberate." West took the torch, examining it closely. His jaw tightened. "Sam, check if anyone's missing from the bunkhouses. Everyone else fan out. Look for tracks, anything unusual." As the men dispersed, Ruthie caught Wes's sleeve. "You think Thomas? Or someone he hired?" His eyes were hard. "Man like that doesn't take rejection well." "But to burn." She stopped, remembering Thomas's face when he left. The humiliation, the anger. He wouldn't. Would he? "Money makes men do desperate things, and protecting pride." Wes shook his head. "No telling what that drives." Within an hour, they had their answer. Fresh horse tracks led from the woods behind the camp to the road, 3 sets moving fast. Bart Collins, the man Wes had fired weeks ago, was missing from town where he'd been drinking and making threats. Collins knew the camp routine, Sam reported. Knew when the night watch would be farthest from the tool shed. And bartender says 3 city men were buying him drinks last night, asking questions. Wes's expression was murderous. They used him, paid him to set the fire while they kept their hands clean. "What do we do?" Cookie asked. "Can't prove it was them." "No," Wes agreed. "But we can make sure it doesn't happen again." He organized new watch schedules, double guards at night water barrels, stationed throughout the camp. But Ruthie could see the weight of it on him. Not just the financial loss, but the violation of the place he'd built. That evening, she found him in the ruins of the tool shed, sifting through the ashes. "Might salvage some of the metal pieces," he said without looking up. "Heads off the axes, maybe." "Wes!" She stepped carefully through the debris. "This wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" He held up a charred axe handle. "I made you choose publicly. Humiliated him in front of everyone. Should have known he'd retaliate. You protected me. The men protected me. I'm not sorry for any of it." He finally looked at her exhaustion written in every line of his face. "You could have been hurt if the fire had spread to the main house while you slept." "But it didn't." She reached out, taking his soot-covered hands. "We're all safe. The camp survived. We'll rebuild." "With what?" He gestured at the destruction. "I put everything into winter supplies. The loss of tools alone. Then we'll find another way." She squeezed his hands. "The men are already talking about it. Jake knows a blacksmith who might extend credit. Sam's brother has spare equipment. They want to help Wes. Let them—" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, when I found you on that road, I thought I was saving you. But somewhere along the way, it turned around. You saved me, Ruthie. Saved this place from being just a business. Made it a home." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what partners do." "Partners." He pulled her against him despite the soot and ash. "I like the sound of that." The next days were a whirlwind of activity. True to Ruthie's prediction, the men rallied. Those with family connections called in favors. Others volunteered extra hours to make up for the lost equipment. The camp that had always run on respect became something more, a true community united against external threat. But Thomas wasn't finished. The second attack came more subtly. A letter arrived from Hartwell, the lawyer, claiming irregularities in the camp's timber contracts. An inspector would arrive within the week to verify compliance with territorial regulations that seemed to have been recently reinterpreted. "He's trying to shut us down legally," Wes said, reading the dense legal language. "If we can't cut timber, we can't pay wages. The men will have to find other work." "Can he do that?" "With enough money and influence, maybe." Wes rubbed his temples. "I need to go to Helena. File counter paperwork, grease the right palms, but I can't leave the camp unguarded, not now." "Then I'll go with you," Ruthie said. "No, it's too dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here alone while you're gone." She crossed her arms. "If Thomas is behind this, he might try something worse while you're away." They argued, but she won partly through logic, mostly through sheer stubbornness. 3 days later, they set out for Helena with Sam and 2 other men as escort, leaving Cookie and Jake in charge of the camp. The territorial capital was a shock after months in the mountains. Streets teemed with miners, merchants, and politicians. The best hotel was full of men in expensive suits, making deals over whiskey and cigars. "Stay close," Wes murmured as they entered the land office. "Some of these vultures make Thomas look tame." The clerk who handled their paperwork was apologetic but firm. New regulations had indeed been passed, backed by several prominent businessmen. The inspection would proceed as scheduled. "Unless," the clerk added quietly, glancing around, "you were to make certain considerations to ensure a favorable report." "How much?" Wes asked flatly. The number made Ruthie gasp. It was more than the camp made in 2 months. Outside, Wes was grimly silent. "We don't have it. Even if we did, paying once means paying forever." "There has to be another way," Ruthie began, then stopped. Across the street, entering the Territorial Hotel, was Harold Morrison, Thomas's business partner. "Wes," she said quietly, "I have an idea." That evening, dressed in her best remaining dress, carefully mended and pressed, Ruthie entered the hotel dining room alone. As expected, Morrison was there dining with several other businessmen. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Miss Elkins, I didn't expect—" "Mr. Morrison," she inclined her head graciously. "Might I have a word privately?" Curiosity won. He excused himself from his companions and followed her to a quiet corner of the lobby. "I'll be direct," she said. "You're backing Thomas's campaign against our camp. I want you to stop." He laughed. "My dear woman, you can't simply—" "Your wife is Eleanor Morrison née Patterson of the Baltimore Pattersons." Ruthie's voice was calm. "My mother was Margaret Patterson Elkins. Second cousins, I believe. They corresponded regularly." Morrison's amusement faded. "What of it?" "My mother kept all her letters, including several from Eleanor expressing concern about your business practices. Something about contracts in Chicago, missing funds that were never quite explained. It was a bluff based on half-remembered gossip from her mother's letters." But Morrison went pale. "You're threatening me." "I'm offering a trade. Leave our camp alone, call off your dogs, and those letters stay private. Continue this harassment, and I'll be forced to write to Eleanor. I'm sure she'd be interested to know what her husband is doing out here." "This is blackmail." "This is survival." She stood smoothing her skirts. "You have until tomorrow noon to decide." Heart-pounding, she left the hotel. Wes was waiting in the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn to bluff like that?" he asked as they walked back to their lodgings. "My father was a shopkeeper," she said shakily. "You learn to read people, guess what they're hiding. Morrison had the look of a man with secrets. And if he calls your bluff, then we're no worse off." She took his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence. "But he won't. Men like that always have something to hide." She was right. The next morning, a message arrived. The inspection had been postponed indefinitely. New evidence suggested the regulations had been improperly passed. The camp's contracts would stand. "You did it," Wes said wonderingly. "You actually did it." "We did it," she corrected. "I just played the cards we had." They returned to camp to find it intact, but tense. There had been 2 more attempts at sabotage, both thwarted by the increased guards. But the men's relief at seeing Wes and Ruthie return was palpable. "Got a telegram while you were gone," Cookie announced, handing over the paper. "From that lawyer fellow." Hartwell's message was brief. "T. Garrett withdrawing all claims. Suggests no further contact. Matter closed." "It's over." Ruthie could hardly believe it. "Seems so." Wes pulled her close, not caring who saw. "You faced him down, made him blink first." That night the camp celebrated. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica. Despite the cold, they built a bonfire in the yard, carefully contained, and watched and passed around Cookie's special brew. "To Miss Ruthie," Sam raised his cup. "Who fought city sharks and won?" "To the camp," Ruthie countered, "and the men who wouldn't let it fall." As the party continued around them, Wes drew her aside. "We still have the inspector coming eventually, the tool shed to rebuild, winter to get through." "I know." She smiled up at him. "But we'll manage, together." Together. He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Ruthie Elkins. Have I mentioned that today?" "Once or twice." She leaned into him, watching their men, their family celebrate in the firelight. "But I don't mind hearing it again." Later, much later, when the fire had died to embers and the men had stumbled off to bed, Ruthie stood in the door of the main house looking out at their domain. Scarred by fire, threatened by greed, but still standing. Still theirs. Wes appeared behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" "That Thomas was wrong. He said I'd have nothing to show for choosing this life." She turned in his arms. "But look what I have. A home, a family, a partner who sees my worth, work that matters. What more could I want?" "A proper wedding," he suggested. "Been thinking we should stop putting that off." "After the tool shed is rebuilt," she said practically, "and new equipment purchased, and—" He stopped her with a kiss. "Or next Sunday. Camp's already expecting it." Wes called her. "Are you trying to rush me to the altar?" "Been trying since the day I proposed. You keep finding excuses." "Not excuses, priorities." But she smiled. "Next Sunday, then. Cookie can make a cake. I'll wear my blue dress, the one that survived the fire. Sam can give me away." "And then," she said, pulling him down for another kiss, "we'll face whatever comes next, together." In the distance, a wolf howled, the same sound that had terrified her on that long-ago night when she'd nearly frozen on the mountain road. Now it was just part of the landscape, no more threatening than the wind in the pines. She'd come so far from the frightened woman in torn silk, found strength she didn't know she possessed, built a life from courage and thread and trust. And this was only the beginning. "Come to bed," Wes said softly. "You'll freeze out here." In a moment. She wanted to fix this in memory: the quiet camp, the star-studded sky, the man who'd given her not rescue but partnership. Her mother's bracelet caught the moonlight as she pulled the blanket tighter. It had seen hard times before. It would see them again. But for now, for this moment, all was well. "I'd rather freeze with you than be warm with a man who sees me as property," she'd told him once. Now she understood the deeper truth. Real warmth came not from fire or blankets, but from being truly seen, truly valued, truly home. "Ruthie," Wes called from inside. "Coming." She took one last look at the camp, her camp, their camp, then stepped inside where warmth and love waited. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she would sleep sound. The day of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with fresh snow turning the camp into something from a fairy tale. Ruthie woke early, her stomach fluttering with anticipation. Through her window, she could see the men already at work, transforming the cookhouse into something resembling a chapel. Miss Ruthie Cookie knocked softly. "Brought you breakfast. Big day needs a full stomach." She opened the door to find not just Cookie, but half a dozen of the men, all grinning and carrying various offerings, flowers made of pine boughs and ribbon, a delicate lace collar someone had hidden away, even a small mirror framed in carved wood. "Made this myself," Timothy Harper said proudly, presenting the mirror. "Figured you'd want to see how beautiful you look." "Oh, Timothy," she felt tears threaten. "All of you, this is too much." "Nothing's too much for our Miss Ruthie," Sam said gruffly. "Now Cookie's got your breakfast and Mrs. Morrison came up from town to help you dress proper. We'll leave you ladies to it." Mrs. Morrison, Sam's wife, bustled in with surprising energy for a woman with rheumatism. "Finally," she declared. "A proper wedding in this camp. I was beginning to think these men had forgotten what civilization looked like." The next hours passed in a blur of preparation. The blue dress carefully cleaned and pressed fit perfectly after Ruthie's own alterations. Mrs. Morrison pinned her hair in an elegant style, weaving in small white flowers the men had somehow procured. "You're a vision," the older woman declared. "That man of yours won't know what hit him." "I'm nervous," Ruthie admitted. "Not about marrying Wes, but I never imagined my wedding would be like this. In a logging camp, surrounded by people who love you," Mrs. Morrison finished gently. "Child, I've seen society weddings with less genuine affection than what's in this camp today. These men would walk through fire for you, and Wes Calder looks at you like you hung the moon. What more could a bride want? A knock interrupted. "Ladies," Jake Morrison called. "Reverend's here from Willow Creek. We're ready when you are." Ruthie took a deep breath, smoothing her skirts one final time. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the light, a tangible connection to her mother and all the strong women who'd worn it before. "I'm ready." The walk to the cookhouse seemed both endless and too short. When the doors opened, she gasped. The men had worked miracles. Pine garlands draped the walls, candles flickered on every surface, and someone had even constructed a proper aisle between the tables. But she had eyes only for Wes. He stood at the far end in his best shirt and a new vest she'd never seen before, his hair neatly combed, but already trying to rebel. When he saw her, his composed expression cracked, revealing wonder and love so profound it took her breath away. Sam offered his arm. "Steady now?" he murmured. "Almost there." The walk down that makeshift aisle between rows of beaming loggers was the longest and shortest of her life. Then she was standing before Wes, his hands warm and steady as they clasped hers. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Michaels began, "we gather in this unique house of God to witness something precious, two souls choosing to face life's hardships together." The ceremony was simple but perfect. When it came time for rings, Wes produced 2 bands of braided silver, clearly handmade. "I melted down some old coins," he explained quietly. "Wanted something that was just ours." "Do you, Wesley James Calder, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was rock steady, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you, Ruth Ann Elkins, take this man?" "I do." The words came out clear and certain, carrying all the weight of her journey to this moment. "Then, by the power vested in me by Montana territory, I pronounce you man and wife." The Reverend smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Calder." The kiss was tender, a promise more than passion, but the cookhouse erupted in cheers that could probably be heard in Willow Creek. Someone started the fiddle, another joined with the harmonica, and suddenly it was a celebration. "Mrs. Calder," Wes murmured against her ear. "Has a nice sound." "The nicest," she agreed, then laughed as Cookie appeared with a cake that defied all expectations, 3 layers decorated with crystallized pine syrup and winter berries. "How did you—" she began. "Been planning since the day you said yes," Cookie admitted. "Man doesn't get many chances to make a proper wedding cake. Pulled out all the stops." The party that followed was unlike any society wedding Ruthie had attended. No receiving lines or formal dances. Instead, there was genuine joy, terrible singing, and stories that grew more outrageous with each cup of Cookie's special punch. "Remember when Miss Ruthie first arrived?" Jake called out. "Wes here couldn't string 2 words together around her for a week." "That's rich," Wes retorted, coming from the man who wore his shirt backwards for 3 days, trying to impress her with his sewing. The laughter was warm, inclusive. These rough men had become her family, this remote camp her world. When she'd stood shivering on that mountain road, she could never have imagined this. As evening fell, the party moved outside despite the cold. A bonfire blazed safely in the yard, and someone had strung lanterns between the buildings. Ruthie danced with what felt like every man in camp, careful, respectful dances that spoke of their regard for her. "My turn," Wes said, finally cutting in on Sam. "If you gentlemen don't mind, I'd like to dance with my wife." The men cleared a space, the music softened, and suddenly it was just the 2 of them swaying in the firelight while snow began to fall. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Only one," she said. "That my parents couldn't see this. They'd have loved you." "I hope so. I want to be the man who deserves you." "You already are." She rested her head against his chest. "You have been since the beginning." They danced until the cold finally drove everyone inside. The party continued in the cookhouse, but Wes and Ruthie slipped away to the main house, their house now officially. "Wait," he said as they reached the door. Before she could protest, he'd swept her up in his arms. "Tradition!" "Wes Calder, we've been living under the same roof for months." "Not as husband and wife." He carried her over the threshold, setting her down gently in the warmth of the front room. "Now it's proper." The house was quiet, the fire banked low. Through the windows they could hear the distant celebration, but here it was just them. "I have something for you," Wes said, producing a wrapped package. A wedding gift. Inside was a wooden box beautifully carved with pine boughs and mountains. But it was the contents that made her gasp, needles of the finest steel threads in every color, scissors that gleamed, and at the bottom yards of deep blue wool. "For a new dress," he explained. "One that's never been mended, never seen hard times. Thought you should have something fine again." "Oh, Wes." She touched the fabric reverently. It was quality goods, the kind she'd sold in her father's shop. "This must have cost—" "Worth every penny to see you smile like that." He pulled her close. "You've given me so much, Ruthie. Let me give you this." "You've already given me everything," she protested. "A home, a purpose, a family." "My heart," he added quietly. "My future, my name, still doesn't seem like enough." She kissed him, then pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Show me our room," she said. "Our proper married room." He'd moved his things into what had been her room, transforming it into a space for two. A larger bed, a second chair by the window, his shaving kit beside her brush and mirror. Simple changes that somehow made everything real. "It's perfect," she said. "You're perfect." He drew her close again. "My brave Ruthie, who faced down businessmen and lawyers and never flinched." "I flinched plenty," she corrected. "I was just too stubborn to let it show." "Even better." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "A fighter, like your mother must have been." She touched the silver bracelet, thinking of all the women who'd worn it before. "She was, and her mother and hers. It's a family tradition, apparently." "Good. We'll need fighters." At her questioning look, he smiled. "For our children. This territory's not getting any easier." "Children?" The word sent a different flutter through her stomach. I haven't thought." "We have time," he assured her. "All the time in the world. But Ruthie, the thought of little ones with your courage in your eyes—" "And your steadiness," she added. "Your strength, our stubbornness combined," he laughed. "Lord help us all." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreams. The tool shed would be rebuilt by spring. They'd expand the operation, maybe add a small sawmill. She could start a real seamstress shop in the corner of the main house, take orders from town. "And teach," she added. "More than just mending. Real skills the men could use." "Whatever you want," he promised. "We'll build it together." Finally, as the celebration outside wound down and the camp settled for the night, they prepared for bed. Ruthie changed into her nightgown, newly made from some of the salvaged fabric, while Wes banked the fire. "Ruthie," he turned from the fireplace, "that first night when I said you'd sleep sounder once you're mine, I need you to know. You're not mine like property. You're mine like my heart is yours, freely given, equally shared." "I know," she said softly. "I've always known. Even when the words were clumsy, your actions spoke clear." "I love you," he said simply. "Will love you till they put me in the ground, and probably after, if such things are allowed." "They must be," she said, moving into his arms, "because I'll love you just as long." Outside, snow fell, steadily blanketing the camp in pristine white. Inside, two souls who'd found each other against all odds settled into their married life, with the quiet certainty of those who'd chosen well. "Listen," Wes said quietly. In the distance, bells rang, probably the men having one last celebration toast. But to Ruthie, it sounded like benediction, like blessing, like coming home. "They're happy for us," she murmured against his shoulder. "We're happy for us," he corrected. "That's what matters." And it was. In this room, in this camp, in this life, they'd built from courage and thread and trust. They were happy, more than happy. They were home. The silver bracelet caught the dying firelight as Ruthie drifted toward sleep. Tomorrow there would be work, there was always work. But tonight, in her husband's arms, in their bed in their home, she would sleep sounder than ever before. Not because she was his, but because they were each other's. Partners in every sense, facing whatever came with joined hands and united hearts. As sleep took her, she thought she heard her mother's voice on the wind. "Well done, my brave girl. Well done." And in the darkness, safe and loved and finally home, Ruthie Calder smiled. Spring came slowly to the mountains, fighting winter for every inch of ground. By April, the snow had retreated to the highest peaks, and the camp buzzed with renewed energy. The new tool shed stood proudly where the old one had burned, built stronger and better with the insurance money and the men's sweat equity. Ruthie stood in the doorway of her new sewing corner, surveying her domain with satisfaction. Wes had sectioned off part of the main house's front room, installing large windows that caught the morning light perfectly. Bolts of fabric lined one wall, sent up from Helena with the spring supplies. A proper cutting table dominated the center, and her precious sewing machine, a wedding gift from the camp men who'd pooled their money, sat in pride of place. "Admiring your empire?" Wes asked, coming up behind her with 2 cups of coffee. "It's perfect," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Did you see I already have 3 orders from town? Mrs. Garrett wants a Sunday dress, and the school teacher needs 2 shirtwaists." "Mrs. Garrett?" He raised an eyebrow. "Thomas's mother. His aunt, actually. She made a point of saying she never approved of his behavior." Ruthie smiled. "I think it's her way of making amends." "Or keeping an eye on the woman who bested her nephew," Wes suggested. "Perhaps, but her money's good, and I intend to make her the finest dress in the territory. Let people see what a mountain seamstress can do." He kissed her temple. "That's my fighter. Speaking of which, Cookie says you promised to teach the men buttonholes today." "After lunch. Jimmy's getting married next month, wants to make his own wedding shirt." She leaned into his warmth. "Remember when teaching them basic mending seemed revolutionary? Now half of them can hem their own pants. You've worked miracles, Mrs. Calder." She was about to respond when they heard horses approaching, too many to be normal camp traffic. Through the window, she saw a group of riders led by a woman in traveling clothes who sat her horse with familiar grace. "Who?" Ruthie began, then gasped. "Oh, my lord, it can't be." But it was. Eleanor Morrison, Harold Morrison's wife and Ruthie's mother's cousin, was dismounting in their yard with the help of a well-dressed younger man. "Cousin Ruth," Eleanor called, looking around the camp with curious eyes. "I do hope we're not intruding. Your letter was so intriguing, I simply had to come see for myself." Ruthie hurried out, smoothing her apron. She'd written to Eleanor after the wedding, partly from family duty, and partly to ensure the Morrisons kept their distance. She hadn't expected a visit. "Cousin Eleanor," she managed. "This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is." Eleanor's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "May I introduce my son, Frederick? He's recently graduated from law school and is helping me sort some family matters." Frederick Morrison was perhaps 25, with his mother's intelligent eyes and his father's strong jaw. He tipped his hat politely. "Mrs. Calder, I've heard a great deal about you." "Have you?" Ruthie glanced at Wes, who'd come to stand protectively beside her. "This is my husband, Wesley Calder. Wes, my mother's cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Morrison." The men shook hands, sizing each other up. Eleanor, meanwhile, was taking in everything, the bustling camp, the men who'd stopped work to stare Ruthie's simple but well-made dress. "You've certainly chosen an interesting life," Eleanor observed. "Might we speak privately? I've come a long way, and I believe we have much to discuss." They settled in the main house's parlor, Cookie hastily providing tea and his best attempt at ladylike refreshments. Eleanor sat properly on the edge of her chair, but Ruthie noticed how her eyes catalogued everything. "I'll be direct," Eleanor began once pleasantries were exchanged. "Your letter concerned me. Not the content, you were quite diplomatic, but the implications. My husband's behavior last winter was disappointing." "I never intended," Ruthie started. "I know exactly what you intended," Eleanor interrupted gently. "And I'm grateful. Harold needed reminding that business and cruelty aren't synonymous. But that's not why I'm here." She reached into her traveling bag, producing a leather portfolio. "Your mother and I were closer than perhaps you knew. We shared Concerns about family matters. Before she died, she sent me certain documents for safekeeping. Documents? Ruthie leaned forward. Your father wasn't the businessman he pretended to be, Eleanor said carefully. But he was clever in other ways. He saw the financial collapse coming and took measures. These are certificates of deposit in a San Francisco bank in your mother's maiden name, hidden from creditors waiting. Ruthie's hands shook as she took the papers. The amount made her gasp, not a fortune, but enough to change everything. How? Why didn't she tell me? She was protecting you. If Thomas or his ilk had known you had money tucked away, would they have shown their true colors? Would you have found your way here to a man who loved you without knowing any of this existed? Wes spoke for the first time. We don't need... Of course you don't, Eleanor agreed. That's precisely why I'm here. Frederick... The young man cleared his throat. There's also the matter of the Patterson Trust. With your mother gone and you married, certain provisions activate. It's not much, about $50 annually, but it's yours by right. I don't understand, Ruthie said faintly. We had nothing. We sold everything. Your father's debts were real, Eleanor confirmed. But your mother was a Patterson. We're nothing if not prepared for catastrophe. She knew someday you'd need options. Options! Ruthie looked at Wes, seeing her own shock reflected. We have options. Indeed. You could expand this operation, move to town, even travel if you wished. Or, Eleanor smiled slightly, you could stay exactly as you are, knowing you have security if needed. The choice is yours. Frederick shifted uncomfortably. Mother, perhaps we should mention the other matter. Eleanor's expression tightened. Yes, Harold sends his apologies, and Thomas has left for California, permanently. It seems his business practices caught up with him. Debts of his own, you might say. Is that why you're really here? Wes asked shrewdly. Making sure we won't pursue anything against your husband? Partly, Eleanor admitted. But mostly I came because Margaret Elkins was my dearest friend, and I failed her daughter once by not intervening sooner. I won't fail her again. She stood gathering her gloves. We'll stay in Willow Creek tonight, leave tomorrow. But Ruth, may I call you that? I hope you'll write. Real letters this time, not careful ones. I'd like that, Ruthie said, still stunned. At the door, Eleanor paused. Your mother would be so proud. You didn't just survive, child. You bloomed where you were planted. That takes rare strength. After they left, Ruthie and Wes sat in silence, the certificates between them on the table. Changes everything, Wes said finally. Does it? Ruthie countered. I still have mending to do. You still have a camp to run. The men still need us here. But you could go anywhere now, do anything. She moved to sit beside him, taking his rough hands in hers. Wesley called her. I walked through fire and ice to get to you. You think a bank certificate changes that? Your mother's dream was probably for you to have comfort, security. My mother's dream was for me to be strong enough to choose my own path. She touched the silver bracelet. This is my choice. This life, this place, you. The money just means we can build it better. A real school for the camp children, he said slowly. Better equipment, maybe even a doctor who visits regularly. New fabric for Mrs. Morrison's arthritis cushions, she added. Books for the men who want to learn reading. A proper laundry building so Jimmy doesn't freeze washing clothes. Practical dreams. He pulled her close. I love that about you. Handed a fortune and you think of others first. Not a fortune, just breathing room. She settled against him. We should tell the men something. They'll wonder about Eleanor's visit. Family business, Wes suggested. Which is true enough. That evening at dinner, the camp was abuzz with speculation about their fancy visitors. Ruthie deflected questions with partial truths. Yes, Eleanor was family. Yes, she'd brought news from back east. No, nothing would change. Except, she added, I'm thinking of starting real classes. Reading, writing, arithmetic for those who want it. Maybe even some basic legal knowledge for contracts and such. The enthusiasm was immediate. Within minutes, half the camp had volunteered either to learn or to teach what they knew. See? Timothy Harper said proudly. Told you all Miss Ruthie Mrs. Calder would civilize us proper. Later, as they prepared for bed, Wes pulled out paper and pencil. We should make plans. Be smart about this windfall. Tomorrow, Ruthie said, taking the pencil from him. Tonight I just want to be grateful. For Eleanor's visit, for my mother's foresight, but mostly, she cupped his face, for that icy road that brought me to you. Grateful for almost freezing to death. Grateful for the man who wouldn't let me. She kissed him softly. Who saw me not as someone to save or own, but as someone to partner with. Partners, he agreed. In everything, good fortune and bad. Health and sickness, richer and poorer, we already said all that, she teased. Worth repeating. He drew her down beside him. Every day for the rest of our lives worth repeating. Outside their window, the camp settled for the night. The new tool shed stood solid against the sky, rebuilt from ashes. The sewing corner waited for tomorrow's work. The account books held promise of expansion and improvement. But inside their room, none of that mattered as much as the simple truth between them two people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to build something real. You know what this means, Ruthie said suddenly. I can pay off that debt to the camp, the one from Thomas's lawyers. Already forgiven, Wes reminded her. Wedding gift from the men. Then I'll put it toward Frederick's idea, that trust fund. Make sure there's always money for any woman who needs shelter here. Who needs a second chance like I got? The Ruthie Calder Fund for Frozen Strays, he suggested with a smile. The Cold Pines Sanctuary, she corrected, for anyone who needs to find their strength. I like it. Your mother would too. They talked long into the night, plans growing from practical to grand and back again. But through it all, the core remained the same. This place, these people, this love they'd built from trust and patience and time. No regrets, Wes asked as sleep finally called. Only one, Ruthie murmured. That I can't thank my mother for her wisdom, for knowing I needed to find my own way before I could appreciate what she'd saved. Thank her by living well, he suggested, by using her gift to help others find their way. Yes. She settled into his arms, peace filling her heart. That's exactly what we'll do. The silver bracelet caught the moonlight one last time before she closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new possibilities. But tonight, safe in her husband's arms, surrounded by the camp that had become her world, Ruthie Calder slept sounder than ever. Not because she was owned, but because she was home. Not because she was saved, but because she'd learned to save herself. Not because life was easy, but because she'd found it was worth living. And in the mountains of Montana, in a logging camp that had become a sanctuary, two hearts beat as one while the stars kept watch and the pines whispered secrets of endurance, hope, and love. The first snow of the new winter came early, dusting the mountains while the leaves still clung to the aspens. Ruthie stood on the porch of the main house, one hand pressed to her lower back, watching the men work on the new building that would house the camp school and expanded seamstress shop. You should be resting, Wes said, appearing with a shawl to drape around her shoulders. Doc Morrison said moderate activity is fine, she interrupted, leaning into his warmth. Watching isn't exactly strenuous. His hand came to rest gently on her rounded belly. Still, our little one needs you strong. 7 months along, and Ruthie still marveled at the changes in her body. Her life, their future. The baby kicked as if in agreement with its father, and she covered Wes's hand with her own. Strong like all the Patterson women, she said, and stubborn like the Calders, heaven help us. Speaking of stubborn, Cookie called from across the yard. Somebody want to tell Jimmy he can't hang curtains while standing on Jake's shoulders before we have our first casualty in the new building. Wes sighed. Be right back, don't move. She watched him stride across the yard, taking charge with the quiet authority that had only grown stronger in their 3 years of marriage. The camp had expanded 40 men now, with proper contracts and regular supply runs. The new building represented more than growth. It was permanence legacy. Mrs. Calder. A soft voice interrupted her musings. Mary Harper Timothy's new bride approached hesitantly. I finished hemming those baby gowns. Thought you might want to check them." "They're perfect," Ruthie assured her after examining the tiny garments. "Your stitching improves every week." Mary beamed. She was the third woman to join the camp after Ruthie and Sam's wife, and her presence had somehow made everything feel more settled, more like a real community. "I was thinking," Mary said carefully, "if it's a girl, she'll need proper dresses, something pretty for Sundays. And if it's a boy, he'll need sturdy clothes for following his father around the timber stands," Ruthie countered with a smile. "Either way, between the two of us, this child will be the best dressed in Montana." The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A wagon rolled into camp carrying a familiar figure, Eleanor Morrison, accompanied by Frederick and, surprisingly, a young woman Ruthie didn't recognize. "I hope you don't mind," Eleanor said after greetings were exchanged. "But when I received your letter about the school, I had to come. And I've brought someone who might interest you." The young woman stepped forward, perhaps 20, with intelligent eyes and worn but clean clothing. "Mrs. Calder. I'm Sarah Whitfield. Mrs. Morrison told me about your sanctuary. I'm a teacher, or was before." She stopped chin-lifting. "I find myself in need of a new position." She was dismissed for teaching arithmetic to girls, Eleanor said bluntly. "The school board found it inappropriate. I thought perhaps a camp that values women's contributions might see things differently." Ruthie exchanged glances with Wes, who had returned from crisis management. His small nod told her they were thinking the same thing. "Can you handle rowdy loggers learning their letters?" Ruthie asked. "They're eager, but not always patient." "Can they handle a teacher who expects them to work as hard at books as they do at timber?" Sarah countered. "I think," Wes said with a smile, "you'll do just fine. Cookie can show you the teacher's quarters, just finished them last week." As Sarah was led away, Eleanor produced a package. "For the baby, from the Patterson women who couldn't be here." Inside was a christening gown of impossible delicacy, obviously an heirloom, and a silver rattle that matched Ruthie's bracelet. "Oh, Eleanor," Ruthie breathed. "It's too much." "It's exactly enough. That gown has welcomed Patterson babies for 60 years. Time it came west to continue the tradition." They settled in the parlor, where Eleanor caught them up on news from the States. Harold had retired from business, apparently content to let Frederick handle the family interests. Thomas Garrett had vanished into California's gold fields, and good riddance. "And you?" Eleanor asked, studying Ruthie with those sharp eyes. "You look well, happy." "I am." Ruthie touched her belly as the baby moved. "Happier than I knew was possible." "The money helped, I hope." "The money helped us help others," Wes answered. "The school, the teacher's salary, the emergency fund for anyone who needs it. Your cousin put it to good use." Margaret always said Ruthie had the best heart in the family. Eleanor smiled. "Seems she married someone who matches it." That evening, the camp gathered to welcome their new teacher properly. Sarah Whitfield proved to have a spine of steel beneath her quiet demeanor, fielding the men's questions with humor and intelligence. "First classes start Monday," she announced. "Basic letters for those who need it, advanced arithmetic for those who want it. And yes, Mr. Morrison, that includes the younger boys. Everyone learns together or no one learns at all. Just like Miss Ruthie, Mrs. Calder taught us," Timothy said proudly. "All equal with a needle, all equal with a book." As the evening wound down, Ruthie found herself back on the porch despite the cold. The stars were brilliant above the mountains, the camp settling into its nighttime rhythms. Safe, peaceful. Home. "Can't sleep." Wes joined her, wrapping them both in a heavy blanket. "The baby's restless tonight, dancing on my ribs." She leaned back against him. "Do you ever think about how different life might have been if I hadn't been on that road, if you hadn't been looking for that horse?" "Try not to," he said honestly. "That way lies madness. We're here together building something good. That's what matters." "A school," she mused. "A real teacher. Families starting to settle. It's becoming more than a camp." "It's becoming a town," he agreed. "Cold Pines proper, maybe, with you as its founding mother. And you as its protector, though I think we protect each other, really. That's what partners do." His hands spanned her belly protectively. What a legacy for this little one. A place where anyone can find shelter, work, respect. Where a woman's worth isn't measured by her dowry or connections. Where a man's worth is measured by his word and his work, she added. Where people get second chances. They stood in comfortable silence, breathing in the cold mountain air. Inside, she felt the baby settle, finally peaceful. Soon they'd meet this new soul would add another life to the community they'd built. "We should go in," Wes said eventually. "You need rest." In a moment. She wanted to fix this in memory, the quiet camp, the star-filled sky, the solid warmth of her husband behind her, the promise of life within her. "Wes, that first night when you said I'd sleep sounder." "Best promise I ever made," he said softly, "even if I didn't fully understand it then. You understood enough. You saw me, really saw me, when I couldn't even see myself clearly." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "You gave me space to find my strength." "You always had it, just needed reminding." "We reminded each other," she corrected. "Still do every day." He kissed her, then soft and sure, a promise renewed. When they parted, snow had begun to fall, large lazy flakes that caught the lamplight from the windows. "Come inside," he urged, "before you catch cold." This time she agreed, letting him guide her into their warm home. As they prepared for bed, she noticed he'd placed the christening gown carefully in the wardrobe, the silver rattle on the dresser where morning light would find it. "Planning ahead," she teased. "Always." He helped her with a button she could no longer easily reach. Learned from the best. As they settled into bed, the baby gave one more kick, a greeting perhaps, or a promise of its own. Ruthie smiled, covering Wes's protective hand with hers. "Boy or girl?" she asked, continuing their nightly game. "Doesn't matter," he said as always. "They'll be loved, valued, taught their worth comes from within. They'll grow up seeing men and women work as equals, seeing strength in kindness, seeing home as something you build, not just find." "They'll sleep sound," she murmured, already drifting. "The soundest," he agreed. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the camp, their town in pristine white. The new school building stood ready for Monday's lessons. The sewing shop waited for tomorrow's work. The sanctuary they'd created prepared to shelter whoever might need it. But inside, in the warmth of their bed, their home, their love, Ruthie and Wes Calder held each other and their unborn child, sleeping sounder than ever. Not because life was perfect, it never was, but because they'd learned the secret home wasn't a place or a circumstance. Home was choosing each other again and again through fire and snow loss and gain struggle and joy. Home was building something bigger than yourself and having the courage to protect it. Home was knowing that whatever tomorrow brought you wouldn't face it alone. The silver bracelet gleamed in the darkness, carrying its legacy forward. Another strong woman had found her place, her purpose, her partner. Another generation would rise knowing their worth. And in the mountains of Montana, where a desperate woman once nearly froze on a lonely road, a community thrived built on trust, respect, and the radical notion that everyone deserved a second chance. The circle was complete, but the story continued as all the best stories do, with love, with hope, with the promise of tomorrow. In the Cold Pine Sanctuary, everyone slept sound. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening while working, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive through your own mountains. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what touched your heart in Ruthie and Wes's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories. 1850, give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of love, courage, and second chances in the American frontier. Until our next story, keep riding those happy trails